Alright, as you know, the Agar Sugarisina, Le Gunjegi, Namshati, on the Givi Latine, and Tiki Givi Latin Chungore, is not that Dunga Diki, Mikivi Latin Chungore, is not that Dunga, that Yawada Dunga say the year, and Kala Yamadeva Rangan Wene. Truptivachi Yungo Mares, is not good and yellow in the Chungores. It's not that in Lekana Kane Saban and teaches jumping Djibouti to Yungores. It's not in Dushin, some Tajeti, Hakovache. Then Hagone, Dinner Cosmi Jawa Karechevina, Didi Kabla, Chivi Kablia, and the Niki Cosmi Jawa, Miki chose Matnawache, and the Kiwi chose Tadi Petition to Pukures. It's not in the Yane, Yantu Cheva in the Yaman Chevaina, then Delatine, and Masola Kiva the back, and the God, Gagores, Consola Targores, that's your anybody, and anybody in the Shirua.
Good afternoon. So, to briefly summarize what we looked at this morning, when we continue to look at the presentation on cause and effect, is that independence on virtuous causes, happiness follows. Independence on non-virtuous causes, suffering follows. Therefore, happiness and suffering do not exist by the way of their own nature or their own essence. They are not inherently existent. Neither happiness nor suffering is. But rather, they are dependent arisings. When one comes to recognize this and clearly see the relationship between cause and effect and dependent arising and emptiness too, one will strive wholeheartedly in the accumulation of virtue and be strong in one's determination to abandon non-virtue. And in this way, one closes the door to the possibility of rebirth in the lower realms.
That is all that Lama Namji, that or some Kosekon Duskalum Nada and Mashi.
We will continue in the text with various quotations attributed to Kadampa Lamas from the time.
All that is Puchonwalaya and the Puchonwalaya and the Kamlung Bigi to Songwares, Puchonwala, Kamlung Be, and the Geshe Bani, Lady Konala Gacho Sulas.
So Kalungpa said, as we're in the middle, page 144, or just below the top, Kalungpa said to Puchungwa, Geshe Thubten taught that only actions and their effects were of vital importance.
Jizada Kamlung Bigi, Puchungwala Karisungores, and Geshe and Dumbegi, Dumbak, and Karisnyam Nature, Lay Gundig in Namsha, the Gechim Zigores, the Negi, and the Negus. Gachawa Gechimore, Chisadi, Gechimore, Tijan Yamen, the Apochore, said Bear Gachimo Zigores, Tinetu, or to Sondwadaje.
So what Kalungpa is saying to Puchungwa is that Geshe Thubten, he placed great importance on the presentation of cause and effect, that this is what people must come to know and put into practice.
Tiznadi Garesene, Nadiruada, Yamlin Jabala, Tin Chabache, when you go on Tin Chabache to Wore. Chisada, Titin Yapuch Menan, and Yamne Kasure, Kovata, Mason Literature, Kovata, Tarbico Watoyaki, and the Koa Literature, Tarbico Watoyada, Semja Tamjiki, Sayoko Watoyaki, Yamlin Yapuche, Tin Chabache, Tin Chabache Tovala, and then Gansole Gevaina. And Dendelia, Yamletiso, and Tarvata Tamji Yoko to Lam Yamlichi to go Marwa. There was a Tinkabach on Yoko to go. One Yoko Tovala, and Kasor, Miki Chubong Turmia, Sungo, Rachisa Lake, and Miki Vile, Paka, Kivili, to the Mado, Miki Leva Sobana, didn't actually get over. Didn't that, Chikazu Tarvata Tamji Yoko Tovala, Yamlichi, Tinkabach, and the Kitchen Buinza. Then Jabach and Tobayaki, you and the Gawatua, Dangan, under the Kiaki, and Tipo Point, the Pemas Gachimore, said Kimtendiro, the Gachimori Nadi.
The reason this is being raised here, why Lama Tsongkhapa is quoting this conversation between Kalungpa and Puchungwa, is because we all want to achieve various goals of the Dharma, whether it's our own individual liberation from suffering, or whether we have the aspiration to enter into the bodhisattva paths and be of transformative impact on the lives of others. Whatever amongst these various goals of the Dharma we have, we require an excellent foundation, an excellent basis for training, so that we can continue in our process of spiritual development, life after life. For that to come about, we have to ensure that we not only know, but live in accordance with this presentation on cause and effect, to ensure that we do not fall into the lower realms where we'll be lost in terms of our potential of spiritual development. And moreover, by understanding this presentation on cause and effect, will aid our accumulation of the required causes to fulfill our spiritual goals. So if we stay oblivious or disinterested in foundational trainings, the higher trainings will not come about.
Geshe Thubten Rabten sheba nyamba gomrin mebre chede dikona nyamso long kawam nyamba sungbi esa.
So this is why Trungpa stated that the presentation, knowing and living in accordance with the presentation on cause and effect, is of vital importance. The quotation continues, but nowadays explaining this, listening to it and meditating on it are considered worthless. Is this just because it is difficult to practice?
Dada sheba da nyamba da gomri mebre chede sido da penang to do sigorda. Chana dada kashigi that le gyune ko nya da anji gomya yo ko ya rina sheda ma chi ba ji ge chen bu ji ne nyamne ji go ma de je. Chana dada sheba da nyamba da gomri mebre chede la ro. Chana da ma zu do de chu ge da de kapla ane ji Geshe Thubten le gyune be ma ji ge chen bu re nyamne ya ko je o ge chen bu re sung go de manju gi mi kashi de chu ge da manju ge 지게 레균레고 파 셰야다 녀야다 녀제는 고미야기 베주체래 린나메 바치도 제 제시무시라 지고 말레스 제시무시 맞지제는 냠내시라 지고 말세 오던다다 Geshe Thubten 레균레 베 맞지 제시무 지고 때 다대행 아주 미디게 레균레고 제시무 지금은 오세 오다 미제완자 니코나 냠솔라와 감 냠도스 제상아도 레균레게 냠솔라라 베 라렌텔레 베 칼레 하우도와세체 송고르다.
So we see from this conversation that even in ancient times there was people were perhaps drawn more to other teachings, not the foundational teachings, and that there was amongst many a lack of interest in perhaps even explaining this, but certainly listening to teachings on this topic or engaging in meditation on this topic. People were far more drawn to other meditation topics or other topics of the Dharma. And then the question posed is this just because it is difficult to do? And Pachungwa then replied in the affirmative, it is just so. Yes, it is difficult to put this presentation into practice. Continues, Trungpa said, and I'll just change one word. Trungpa said, followers of Atisha, great pretension is totally inappropriate. This dependent arising is subtle.
That's your pass. Then in come chair, Mirusi, the Danga, legend, the Sishin, the Shuchi, Povakia, and I get your Maresere, 지교 말치다 레긴데 덴테신 남차 빼면서 참으슈레스 대대시 쇼베가서 사이 덴지게 레균에 남차 덴진 저거 차신 차와디 산이 권이마도 킹이 말에 손로와디 나신레다 뭐디 제사 덴데스 하고도 빼지 신구도 저 마예제나 보보제요 말레스 제사 덴인자 넬리아 덴지게 남차다 레균데 덴진 제비게 차신 차와디 빼 참모레스 제사데 차오슈레스
Going back to where we started last night, to understand the subtleties of karma is something beyond ordinary beings, only something Buddhists can understand. So to have whatever understanding one has of cause and effect, to have some great pretension to be particularly puffed up about one's knowledge, thinking that one knows more than one does, this is a mistake. Rather, to approach this topic with an open curiosity, recognizing there is always more to come to understand. The text again, Puchungwa said, "In my old age, I am at last turning to the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish."
자다 나니 스다가 바 지게 경호라 차는데 아니 장르서 더 장르 예균제고 남샤 손시비기 더 장르는 바도 신 바다네 직로도 시삼다이도 아니 바 지게 대가질레 카 랭기 직송세야데 되네야 되네게 예균제 남샤데 되네 쉐도 선비게 야고라 하고 소세야를 송거스나
Puchungwa is saying that even though now that he's advanced in years, he's turning to this sutra which discusses the presentation of cause and effect in some detail. He's turning to it now nearing the end of his life, so as to show the great importance still that we should be placing in terms of the presentation on karma. Not thinking it's something one grows out of, something that one knows and can forget. In the final quotation, I've just changed the translation in the final sentence. And Sharawa said, "The Buddha taught that whatever errors and faults come about, they should not be blamed on an inauspicious place or on the construction of some building. It is simply that, by doing this action in the past, this is produced here now."
아니 지기 총한비게 멤버리샤스 디슈 멤버리샤 칼초파 직초 디초 멤버리샤 디초를 전에 아니 야고요 말이잖아. 근데 강바르도 강보 칼초 딜팔로거래 딜로베 견이데 내야 멍불리고를 변조 야고 차고 말이잖아. 니네기 시기로 여러와다. 제가 총한나 칼라 렘바스 제 칼라 가지고 아직 야고 어디 강보 잡한 지민도 강보 칼로한 지민도 안디 지민우스면 소세 마릭 바디 데니게 칸바나 초 카초 데달이야 아니 바지 어디게 지민우스 디엔사 데네 강아 중고레스네 데네시아 용고로 와다 제가 엔딩한주 데네 시고레스 산예기 디순고 말해지래 산예기 네바 가르치면은 아주기 나를 내 가르사바 있네 거소수기 유가르사베네 델레테네 용고레 마도 아니 강보 잡나 디마리다 네네 니제 초 강보 카초 고르다 고초를 디마리기 토네 아니 가서디 숭고 말에 산이 순에디 가르스네 레 가르체베네 디 제부된 용고레 숭고레 제 데네 용고로 어디 지사 산지 가르 숭고로서네 아주기 변조를 튕겨요 어디 진비 디보레 진비 냠소 렘발레테네 아니 제부 용고레 마도 진바 마다와 진비 제부 디 용고 말해야지 튕기는 용고 말해야지 송고로 봐 지상 안주 가브렐레 가서도 어다 결혼 디 가서래 결혼 강보 잡다 지미도 네 yang said ligi mundu sisa kabu dus kalo de ka dus dir said denege yang de jidin bana jona joro adi di tata mares ngor dala sanji gi din sung yo mares sisa denege nga jigi di dusu cherang an beresha dusu an beresha 세다 데니게 초지 민도 세다 컴버접다 지 민도 세다 아니 지가 어두스네 델이야 마리바디 델이야 카요야 요 말레스 산이게 되네 수요 말레스 올다
This quotation from Sharawa is pointing to when things go wrong, people point to many reasons. But all too often, they ignore the primary reason, which is a cause and effect. Causes created in past lives lead to results experienced now. And they may well want to point to something about a building built facing the wrong direction or an inauspicious date and give overemphasis to this kind of thing. When the Buddha didn't teach about these topics, what he taught about is cause and effect. That if one is experiencing a particular result, this came from causes accumulated in the past. So, for example, one's financial situation, this is dependent on causes created in the past, such as and causes such as generosity. So, therefore, people all too often want to look at, again, going with the illustration, on inauspicious directions or inauspicious dates and place emphasis on that, ignoring what the Buddha actually taught, which is cause and effect.
구 장고 구념도 숨고 님이지를 그래도 중요한 하대요 이걸 남부 구숨세야 돼. 세상 네 뒤에디 님들에 남부 구숨세야 돼. 남부 짠자 구숨고 뒤에 되는게 구념들이 거래 저래. 세상 네 남부 구숨 님들에 개워주세요 말해서 개워주고요 말해서 대시고 되네. 말 라다 말데 지다 마직바 마직바 노트 마직 nemba스인데 좋아 대 nem바 되는게 마직바 짠장 굴리기레스 굿 니미지레 뒤수지레 좀 거레스 제가 될 nem바 구좀 세워 nem바 구좀 좀 주게다 사지 좋아다 nem바 구좀 거레스 제가 디님에 개와지야요 말레스 가서 개와주요 말레라 거래.
So there's an expression in the Himalayan regions that problems come in nines. So I think we say something similar maybe, but with threes. But problems come in nines. And so there's no talk when one is having problems raining down upon oneself about cause and effect, but one just puts it off, problems come in nines, and therefore we're having a bit of a rough time of it right now.
제가 디님들에 내가 제가 말 내가 람르용 말해서 제가 디님들 공생했던 거거든요. 주부대와는 로사지고 로사던 거 공생지고. 디님들에 최제요 막 계획 잡아도 내가 잡아 지교 말에 세네다 되고 그래서 그래. 디는데 되다 공생했던 거다. 근데 대 공생다 제는 칼라사 기우지 되고 그러네. 로사던 거.
Okay, got that a little wrong. So there's something about, there's a particular day where we have it on the calendar. It's like 9 inauspicious omens or something like this. So there's, in terms of this day, it's like, whatever we do will go wrong, so therefore let's do nothing, let's just have a holiday. And so every year at this date, then we have a holiday. Not thinking about cause and effect and whether it's still relevant in any way, but on this date of 9 inauspicious omens, we just do nothing because the belief whatever we do will go wrong.
제가 Lama 섬김이 기바 자신 보시는데 깨와래서 나 남부 고som killing 메스 염치디 남부 고som 생 남부 지고 말데 지금 말해서.
So His Holiness has said explicitly he doesn't believe in this kind of thing at all. In fact, he said the previous incarnation of Lamrim was born on this particularly inauspicious day. So how can we place any faith in these kinds of systems?
나디 남부 고som 세야 돼. 디 지베디게 베게 지다한디게 시요라다 지다지도 신의 정보라 세야 돼. 나 상이들의 상부 주som 시호다야. 상부 주som. 남바다 상보로다 대지 님지 남부 고som 차서와 상이들 남바디 상부 주som스의 구간을 찍내버지 상부 야가 상부 주서라도 구리진 주망하러 와다. 제가 상부 주som 세야 돼. 야 야고 지고
So astrologers come up with these dates and systems, and so perhaps to counteract this day of 9 bad omens, there's a day of 13 auspicious signs.
네. 야, 여러분께 가르침을 또 저로 지게 말했죠. 손에 대해 감지 가르침을 먼저 배워디게 배지 변조 야고 차그래서네 잠발라 순야다 양룹제의 제지고레스 이내 가소리 밀리너 세디지요 말했어. 야가다 지기도 하면 양룹 되네기 잠발라 두고 엄마디나 밀리너 몽고요레스.
And His Holiness also jokes, as Tibetans, we put so much faith in these wealth practices such as Dambala, but I look amongst my fellow Tibetans, I don't count a single billionaire, but in our world there are many hundreds of them, and I bet none of them have made a single offering to Dambala.
제가 돈나 가르송고로서네 변조 야고 차데 소수기 개왕함이 진바당 선음 사에는 차기를 마도 소수기 유 진바당 사면에 니네기 샨다질이야 직 변조 용야 돈다 두베네 변조 직 잠발하게 야선 파수제 용 말해서 월다디 돈다디서 월다가 이제 만주게다 레균리 지단 개위 레사바이나 디디부 디 용그레 지단님아 만주 변조 야고 차야기 유 진바당위 진배 냠는 야고 제여바이나 다 제보디 용그레스 냐마 소수기 개위 진배 냠는 제매바이나 다들 그 소수기 지게 변조를 돈달라 안 지게 하수바나 제일 직 잠발라 두베네 라카보레스 그래.
The meaning of what is being said here is that wealth comes from generosity, and if those causes of from generosity have not been created, whatever endeavors one engages in to create wealth will not be successful. Those causes have to be there to enjoy the result. So it's into cause and effect where we should place our trust and our attention. These other practices, such as Dambala, it's not that they are worthless or deceptive. They have a role to play, but in that they can lead to the ripening of causes. But if those causes have not been accumulated, no matter what prayers and aspirations and practices one does, one is not going to attain the required result. The causes have to be accumulated for the result to follow.
저기 디니기야 잠발라리아 지체고프이 지셰베네 아니 이나 다디 디기 세델이야 변조마 제베나 디 체고프이 대부 야 마음바나 야직 저기 제고디 민기로와 지사디네 자 이네 디 디니기 아주 가르삼 땅지어서 세다가라래 변조를 야고 차에 돈달라 두고 와다 두요도 안디라 갖고래서 그래 이나다 델레야 초보푸미지 제요도 제베이나 아직 다가라 체다가라만 디기 푸이기 제고 다 마음바나 용으로 와다야.
People certainly do put energy into Zambala practices, and they may well bear success in dependence on not just the practice, but the causes created in the past. But with this, perhaps it betrays, in some, a focus on this life's results, this life's success, this life's pleasures, and not a focus on accumulating the causes now for the success of future lives. And the Dharma is supposed to be used to lift our focus from the pleasures and problems of this life to striving to achieve spiritual goals in lives beyond this. So it is quite possible that if someone is focusing on material success through Dzambala practice, they'll actually have lost the focus and the point of the Dharma. If one has accumulated good causes from generosity in the past, and one does practice such as Dzambala to ripen those causes, it is likely to be successful.
Yeah. There's some source that in it, that Dondala, Jugi, Ganchele, Sanji, Karsun, Senangu, Marik by the Gajik, and Choa down, and the Ken Kangba down, Dugi Timinu said, the Sunyo Mares, Karsun was Le DJB, DKS, Dirke, Sunyo Reche, Chesandang, I lay. JQ tennis saban the Jew Shungre, Chesan you, Gawa saban the Jew Dunga, Deva Yungre, Jebu, you Dungas, Migawa sabana, the table, and the Chigi, Kasore, Dunga Shungre, such as a Le DJP and Dirkecha, such as a Kiwi Le Sabana, Tendole Kiana, Migiwi Tiba Sabana, Nantole Kiala, Soba, Lucine, Yungre, said the Negisha, the Sunyo Res.
So the key meaning to take from this final section is that the Buddha emphasized the teachings on cause and effect rather than emphasizing directions that homes should face and auspicious dates and so forth. So our focus in terms of the results we want to experience, we should focus on accumulating those causes. And when things are not going our way, we should recognize this is the ripening of past non-virtuous karma, not look to things like dates and directions. And in particular, we should focus on accumulating the causes that lead to rebirth in higher realms and avoiding those causes that will lead to rebirth in the lower realms.
Dihan Dadimasana Gama Sashi and Migawala Soba Yungurua, Chidina, Desupa in the top Mary, the shower, Horres, Chisanimbo Tupshi Done, Horres, Shana, and the Darures, that in my Divashayaki, Nimbo Tupshi Korma, Shuere.
Through hearing and reflecting well on this presentation on cause and effect, then the outcome should be that one is very focused on one's way of thinking, ensuring that it is in accordance with this presentation, and that one's mind is not under the influence of the afflictions, and certainly not our speech and behavior. In this way, avoiding non-virtue and accumulating extensive virtue. Even though one may well be training in this way, one will still make errors and sometimes accumulate non-virtue, as well as having a store of non-virtue on one's continuum accumulated in lives previous to this. So with that in mind comes the next presentation, how to purify non-virtue by means of the four opponent powers. So continue on page 144. I'll just change, just one word. Even though you try to avoid being tainted by faulty conduct, some fault may occur under the influence of non-conscientiousness or a multitude of mental afflictions. Do not ignore it. You must make an effort to engage in the means for rectifying it as taught by the compassionate teacher. Infractions against one's vows should be rectified as is taught according to each of the three types of vows, while bad actions should be rectified by means of the four powers.
대다를 세대 대시 레균의 냠술렌단 송로 아두스의 냠술렌바 송바 나신제 아니 예주의 마고 발에 배장마서 되네게 예주의 마고 받던다래 배주의지 냠는 제바 이나야 안 가브리엘에 가려서는 밤에 봐 소소 가브리엘에 전시지 팀마도 바지 밤에 온도 송하다 아직 냠모바 슈체비 냠모바 마위 균이 마와로서 바디 원기 아니 예바 니 중화 용거래서 예바 용거래서 되는 예바 주나 아다 예바 중 사사다 다 가르쳐 왔는데 야마샤바체 안데야 안두시네 메샤 마샤 샤도 미루와서 샤도 롱 말에 샤교 말에서 람사 안에데 가르스네 좀 두시쟁이 만두기야 묘모 가서 디바디게 봐 칠주비게 탑송요래 진짜 탑송화들이야 배주체체 아니 배주체고래 해서 좀 두시쟁이 칠주비 탑송바 남라 아니 배주 냠는 제고래 라렌다고 그래서
The outcome of our training thus far should be that, look in the first sentence, one tries to avoid being tainted by faulty conduct, and one should be striving to engage in virtue. But as trainees, then we will still, and continuing, some faults may occur under the influence either of a lack of conscientiousness, so where there's a virtuous mental factor of conscientiousness, kind of one's a moral guide or ethical guide, if that is either lacking, or one is overwhelmed by a multitude of mental afflictions, either they're strong or overwhelmed one in some way, then non-virtue may well be accumulated. So here it is important not to ignore it. Do not think it does not matter, that from time to time I may do some non-virtue, it doesn't matter. One needs to address it. As it continues, you must make an effort to engage in the means for rectifying it, as taught by the compassionate teacher.
네, 자다 산이기 되네게 녀모바다 되네게 밤에 온게 녀모 동화 중화도 녀마로서 녀 디발로 중바이나 가르송여서네 탑이 샵라 가르송여서네 대야 동화 칠주스니 돈보숨 소소니 송바다자라 지산 동화 칠주다데 아니 돈보숨 세대 소사르기 돈바다 랍중을 쓰고 소사르기 돈바 아니 소사르기 돈바 송지 소사르기 돈바다 개비 동화 중화이나 안델야 안산지기 소사르기 돈바 동화 중화 칠주에 다시 송여레스 디나신 제고레스 장주선비기 돈바렌제 안델야 안 동화 중화이나 양 장심 되네기 칠주에서 초가 록송야 디나신 제고레스 생각이 돈바랑제 되네기 동화 중화이나 되네기 중화이나 되네 야소샤 제단 샤단디 로송여레 대자 카간의 송여 디나신진 제고레서 제상 칠주에 돈바 숨 소소르네 송바다르 자라 세르지나 상하게 돈바 소더게 돈바 장심게 돈바 상하게 돈바 다 소소 소소다 개비게 동아리를 중화나 대 샤단디야 소소라라는 게 초가 소소라 요레스디나 제고레서
While striving in virtue, one will occasionally accrue non-virtue. Then do not ignore it, but rather strive to rectify it, to purify what has been accumulated, and not to repeat this. So how to do so? You must make an effort to engage in the means for rectifying it as taught by the compassionate teacher. So the Buddha taught, if we divide non-virtues into two, those of downfalls and non-virtues, looking first at downfalls, infractions against one's vows should be rectified as is taught according to each of the three types of vows. So if it's the pratimoksha vows, the vows of the ordained, then these need to be purified in a particular way. Or if it's the bodhisattva vows, then these need to be purified in terms of their particular ritual, and likewise in terms of the vows of secret mantra. These too also need to be purified in accordance with their rituals. So when one commits an infraction of a downfall, then it needs to be purified in accordance with the specific ritual taught in relation to the class of vow.
난 내게 지나 디바 칠주에 봤어야 돼 칠주에 봤어야 돼 도시 자오 뭐 도시 권에 안에 샤워를 해서
And then not downfalls, but non-virtue, while bad actions should be rectified by means of the four powers.
다데 님보 돕시고네 샤인도당 님보 다시 한지 님보 돕시데 당보들에 단 순진비 돕세 제로 님보 숨시 순진비 돕제 되네 님보 군도 주비 돕세 되네 녀발에 라미 돕비 돕세 되네 띵이 돕세 오도시네 돕시디 도송거와.
Those four opponent powers are the power of remorse or regret, the power of the antidote, the power of the promise, and the power of promise or the power of restraint, and then fourthly, the power of the support or the basis.
아니네 당보 돕당보니 순진비 돕니에서 토마 메바네 미게와 제발은 여바만와 인데스 디케와라 내민 속에 제부 숨기 네 제부 숨기수 검수 검고소스 아니 딘마체 딘네 라렌예체 세르웨 담베 샤바다 상기 송외 권에 샤바 니기 자오스.
We're looking at the first of the four opponent powers, the power of remorse or regret. The first of the four powers is the power of remorse, which is to have great regret for the non-virtuous deeds one has done since beginningless time. For it to arise, one needs to meditate on how the three types of effects, such as fully ripened effects, are produced. When applying this power, use the two confessions, the confession in the Golden Light Sutra and the confession to the 35 Buddhas.
오늘은 당가서 순진배 돕세디 가지 먼저 가르쳐야 하시네 토마 메바네 미게와 제발을 교바마와 깨와 되시는 교바께들에 당도 도시네 예만의 사셰비게다 그디 사베나 데네 다데 사바네 예마 사바나 데네게 미게와 중화들이야 아다베 지마송어서 뱅게디 지마송베다 교바께들에 다베 노트치샤디 지마송베 교바께데 다가지 디삼다이디 지민동의 노트 제시하선배 삼다이다 디 예모 순진배 돕세디리다.
So what is the power of remorse? And as it says, the first of the four powers is the power of remorse, which is to have great regret for the non-virtuous deeds one has done since beginningless time. So it is this mind of regret, and it is the most important opponent power. It needs to be cultivated sincerely, then the others will naturally follow.
지난디 녀마 제비 디바 제발라 디미누스 비 교바 슉침부 게알이야 안에 가르삼당 거라스네 제 디게와라 내민 속이 제부 숨 기수 공고리에서 제자다 미게와 제바이나 이 제바이나 디기다 나솔 마게 디기 둥아 데네데 용고로 와서 베게 데네기 둥아 요다데 삼당 거레스 둥아 냠나선 오다 데네기 둥아 제사 강한데 삼당인데 강한데로 수인다 탈고 고자 아다 녀마 제바데 디미누스 베게다 교바 슉침부 기투 그래 제자다 안디카소레 내면 속에 제부 숨시를 내면 만족하되 냐와다 이다 눈로망 지게 기르게 기대려야 하는 지금 다 눈을 개발에 강화된데 용어를 이다를 개발에 강화 동화된데 용화 용어를 그래서 냐와를 개발에 다 냐와 쪽 감쪽이 되네 막 가와 개발에 동화된데 용어를 선배게 되네 삼다바이나 그래서 다 냐마 되네기 디버치 자오기 팀도 선배다 되네기 안티오바 슈치모 기기리에 제사디는 용수 제부드 강아데 삼마타나 강아데레 타르두게 삼기 투고 말와 제사 강아데 삼다에도 강아데 삼다 강아데 미디어 바인자 델레 타르두게 삼바기 게 중고로 봐 제사 되네자 곧 되네기 동안 용수 삼다베나 되네 나를 제지비 디바디다 팀에서 베교바 슈치모 기기리에 제사 교바기에 돈달라 되네 삼당고 그래서
And the text continues, for it to arise, so the power of remorse, one needs to meditate on the three types of effects, such as fully ripened effects are produced. So here, one recalls specific non-virtues that one has done, and being aware that it, by it being non-virtuous, should it ripen at the time of death as a propelling imprint, necessarily rebirth in one of the lower realms will follow. So here, one reminds oneself of the three lower realms and their respective sufferings, the sufferings that beings are experiencing now in the animal realms, in the spirit realms, in the hell realms, and recognize that this non-virtue that one has accumulated, should it happen to ripen, it will ripen in one of those realms. And this then leads to a strong degree of remorse for the non-virtue accumulated. And this will come about in dependence on one's prior meditations earlier on the sufferings of the lower realms, as well as on karma itself. So in this way, one will generate sincere regret for what one has done, having this thought, I wish I had never done that.
Lala nye se sere damba shaba da sanje songyo kone shaba nigi jawo se de lala nye se se de nyembo timbe kapla se or diba shabe kapla kane se or se ne sere dembe do dwenje ani dweda diba shaya do na di dweda da sanje sumju songa le cha se je ondo se ne jeba je ne diba shade je or esa lala nye se da nyu da di wo ma di 가소리 님베 또 비공을 마 차고리 뉴 또시 나네 인 님보나 대화를 제사디 강로 손들이 내다 가제레 디버 샤베가 라렌시르다 디버 샤베가블라 가네 샤고레스네 세르덴 비도 된지 두신 샤야다 상유 숨주 송알이야 네 소디브지체 또 된지 봐 아니 제바 제네 어디 샤고 샤바 이기 자고 되는 샤고레스 송도.
And it concludes with, when applying this power, use the two confessions, the confession in the Golden Light Sutra and the confession to the 35 Buddhas. So the confession to the 35 Buddhas and Golden Light Sutra, these are also included within the power of the antidotes, which is about to come. But in the recitation of this practice, it serves also to generate regret, referencing non-virtues that one has done. So when one utilizes one of these practices, it can serve to stimulate regret as well as then be the power of the antidote. But what's important is that one does give rise to genuine regret for what one has done, because that regret leads to the subsequent antidotes being so much more forceful and genuine.
님보 돕시 아니 다 님보 돕시야 디디레다 님보 군도 주비 돕라 주그레스 지나데 주마 야와 체반네 죽제제나데 죽 아니 도데 삼몰레 템바 동바니라 메바 다와 데바라 템바 구수레 템바 쳬바레 템바 첸레 템바 오스.
So the second of the four powers, the power of the fully applying the antidotes. This is 6 points. Relying, and I'll just change the translation again a little, relying on the profound sutras, resolute faith in emptiness, relying on recitation, relying on images, relying on making offerings, and relying on names.
냐 샤야기 된다라 디버드 다야기 된다라 도데 삼몰레 템바시 다 도데 삼모티 템바데지 세베템베 돌라스 템바다다 도가르 템바이나 고 소소게 지오르 데니기 도 템바 다 디자 다 디바샤베 조 풍보송베도 아니 동아샤바스 풍보송베도 시고레데 안디 되야라 소바다 세베템바 되야라 소바 데니기 또 망보여로 데니 되야라 소바 템바이나 데니기 되된지 디바샤야게 된다를 되게 삼몰 템바세 되게 되야들이에서 직된지.
When one recalls non-virtue that one has done, particularly in the way described where one is aware of the ripening results that await one, one will naturally want to confess and purify so that one does not suffer in the way that one will otherwise. And therefore, one may choose to recite sutras such as those mentioned above, the Golden Light Sutra, or the practice of the confession to the 35 Buddhas, so as to purify these past misdeeds.
이네 동반이라 메바시데 딘진 제외 주에 삼다시 양도 동반이 거 딘네게 삼다 콤바데라다 동반이라 메바세데 지사다 디파이 다에 돈달에 딘네 콤바 돈이를 미데 어두시는 콤발라 소바 제바이나 대 디바다야 탑람 찍디네 해서.
The second would be that, so believing in emptiness, but it's a stronger translation required, like resolute faith in emptiness, but it comes down to meditating on emptiness.
대발의 땜바시든 아사바들이 지상 대발의 땜바시든 한주기다 도시심백이 대바체바 도시심백 공대신에 디바샤에게 도시심백 공대체제 어두시네 공 도시심백 아사바든자 대발의 땜바세요.
The third was that of relying on recitation. So here one would specifically think of mantra recitation such as that of Vajrasattva, reciting the 100-syllable mantra as an opponent power to purify past misdeeds.
다 구슬의 땜바세디 다 산지 구샹바래다. 산지 구 소수게 디바다야게 단달라 산지 구샹해야 된다. 디바세와 짐도 제사다. 나 되네기 디바데 다고디 산지 구디 신이 sembe신 구샹해야 되게다. 구슬의 땜바세디.
Relying on images, so this would be as a means of purification, either making images of the Buddha oneself or commissioning them to be made.
단데네기 처벌의 땜바세야 돼요. 즉 야 권절이야 라마다 권절다 이름을야 처벌해야 되다. 그래서 처벌해지 야 디바다야기 된다로 처벌해야 돼.
And offerings then to the Buddhas, to one's yidam, and so forth.
천의 땜바세야 즉 청아서서 변행한 저기 매니타다 에네 가서래 덤바사 이게 청아자야라서 여러분 어디네게 청아 디바다야게 된다려야 소식에 산지게 청아 디바데 두스 디바네 청아의 천의 땜바세.
And the last was that of name mantras, relying on names. So here one could recite name mantras such as the name mantra of Buddha Shakyamuni.
나라 님부 톱세디 제사당 한주게 되시 일단 디바체바도 삼다 오당에 되는시나 지미도 배 너트 중샤 다딩이 디바데 샤긴 삼제 당한주 디소 안에 가르체베네 다 디바다에게 탑람데 님부데 디리에서 월 님부 톱세.
So the process of applying an antidote necessarily needs to follow having generated regret, not having recognized our mind and perhaps our behavior went in the wrong direction. Now we try to rectify it by turning our mind intentionally in a wholesome direction, and we do so by applying an antidotal power that one is drawn to.
Bendigo karine tinigi sosugi dodi tsik lemba sosugi tsui lemba de zimba sidi da lo le zimba lo zin je ha kyo ya la so ba da den lo ba se da lo zin je ma ton du su ma zo lo ba ne du xin lo ba ne di yin song do.
So I just briefly covered the 6 there. Now the text presents them one by one. Relying on the profound sutras, the first is to hear the words of collections of sutras, like the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, retain them, read them, and so forth. So in other words, to read sutras, in particular those on the view of emptiness, the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, read them or hear them being read or memorize them, teach them, listen to teachings on them, praise them, and so forth. This can all be done as an antidotal power and thereby used to purify.
아니 미소스라랑기 가사 소스라랑기 직바다 온바다 니벌에 빠페기다 두스제레바다 근데 다지 비시 로진 제제 심투가 니버이건도 바로로 신제 아니 교야라서 바다 양지 로진 제퇴에 매바다 소식이 매반의 소식이 로야 되지 로야로다 다 소소로 마신다 가르쳐오려네 미션다로 로주야 돼 자그로 미션다 로한 투데 칼라단 제니 그래서 대학 구인 푸이셰 로주바는 다지 디야 자그로와 랑기 말로 로마신신로 로주바나 자그로와 디소.
So we see here, in terms of relying on the profound sutras, it's presented in a quite a wide or broad manner, in that if one oneself has the capacity to put these sutras to memory with an understanding of the meaning, excellent, one should do so. If that is beyond one's capacity or time capacity or intellectual capacity, then one should read them. But if that is beyond, either one can't read them or one lacks the time or lacks the ability to read, then one can sponsor someone else to read them and you perhaps offer them lunch and so forth. So there are a variety of ways that one can purify by means of the profound sutras.
지난 직련바 되게 직련바서 직이 돈다데 삼다와서 돈다 삼다 직련바 진바세데 직이 돈다 직이 로를 진바세를 고거래.
So the Tibetan here is literally to take the words and to hold the words, which then how it's translated is fine, but it shows that they are taking the words or holding the words. You can take them to memory, you can reflect on them, or you can recite them. So those words aren't used specifically. What is literally used is taking and holding.
아디지 동일에 매바 세대 가르송어스나 다메진 외세위 춘일란 주진 되만에 답을 이체바고 세대.
The next is that of resolute faith in emptiness. The second is to enter into selflessness and luminous reality and to trust in primordial purity.
이란다 되니게 다메지 외세가 세대 최탐제 랑신 주비 동바 다신 제바자 강라야 마도 랑용원의 주바 자오기니 매바 동바들라 다 외사와세요. 외사와 제나디 최니 주진세데 델이야 되니게 제바제지 델이야 곰발라 소바다 되니 쉐바 되니게 주진 되니 되만에 다바 이체바고 세데 제사 강라이마 랑응원의 주바 자오기니 매아 선비기다 셈딩기 이치해야 돼. 이치고 그래서 대신 뭘 봐서야 돼. 이치 봐서야 돼. 그거다.
So the translation resolute faith in emptiness is probably the best. So the second is to enter into selflessness and luminous reality and to trust in primordial purity. So what this means is that one meditates on selflessness, that all phenomena, whether the self or any other phenomenon, is empty of existing by way of its own inherent nature. It does not exist in the way that it appears, but it is empty of existing in the way that it appears. So this is the meditation on selflessness, and one comes to luminous reality, or you could say the ultimate reality. It's literally, we normally translate it as the clear light, reality of clear light, something like that, so luminous reality. So Geshe is saying what it comes down to is the final way of being, is that phenomena are empty of existing by way of their own nature, and to trust in primordial purity. So this means to have a deep felt trust based on one's knowledge and reasoning that phenomena have always been empty of existing by way of their own nature. It's not that they once did and now don't. They never have existed in this way. And so having the deep trust that the very ultimate nature of phenomena is that they lack in inherent existence. The next is relying on recitation. The third is to recite special dharanis, like the 100-syllable mantra, in accordance with the appropriate rituals. So this is referring to the 100-syllable Vajrasattva mantra. Do it in accordance with one of the sadhanas. But it doesn't necessarily mean it can only be the Vajrasattva mantra. That is just what is referred to here. But that one, with a deep trust and faith, one engages in such a practice.
본상의 슈발레사 딘단데 가서서네 쇠가 남의 체비 매제이 마림 신도 창승 군세에 따라서 대제 매라 추림 룽기 바 전지 첨보 매제 딜라세 지더가 간라 니메 외스르기 동나지 시지 미수 주어신 추림 니메 외스 대주기 동나 디비 강장 세버 교루스 문나 마라 마르메 중화이 문나 말류 설버 제바신 세럽 돈에서비 디버문 대주 마르메 뉴도 사와치에스 제송소스
Lama Tsongkhapa then quotes the verses from the questions of Suburu Tantra. As when the flames of forest fires flare up in spring, uncontained, burn all the underbrush, so the wind of ethical conduct fans the fires of recitation, burning up bad deeds with flames of great joyous effort. As when the sun's rays strike the snow, it cannot withstand the brilliance and melts. So when the sun rays of ethical conduct and recitation strike the snows of negative actions, they evaporate. As when lighting a butter lamp in pitch darkness dispels all the darkness with none remaining, so the darkness of bad deeds accumulated in 1,000 lives is quickly dispelled by the lamp of recitation.
창생 세바다라세데 다 sö기 뒤려야 당은 주와다 오슬레레 신날 메바야 망불리고라다 베티스고라다 데니게 sö기 갑리야 차와 침보다 데니 갑리다 데니 사다 야 텔레 메치 파와 있나 메치 파와나 데니 메바야도 데니 파 지금 메디 야야 바바야 된다라 샨다기 베지 톱시다 메나야 호르 마dim신도 호코두 시네 림바신도 림신도 파안 창생선 지금 첨보당 충분히 가르나 차상 지루고래 지구도 와서 올다 상세 세바 따라서 베디체 베디로.
In Australia, this analogy we see at the beginning, we all too familiar with, as when the flames of forest fires flare up in spring, uncontained, burn all the underbrush. So this is something we all have experience of observing.
어디 나신다 대지 제용도에서 당한테 대지 제용도 대지 가르스네 저기 디바체바디 팀이누 셈베 교바스음다 디바디 파샤기 셈베게 삼다제 대지 제용도 대지 제바디다 메나신체 나딘마 다 메디바요도 다딘마 슈파 땡데 룽기파 룽슈체베게 메디시 바르고와 디나지 룽기 최디 추림 소야 되지 지난 추림하고 송제 데니게 대주 제바이나 안에 룽기 바다 데니게 안에 지기 추림세디 룽나신제 데니 전주지 무티제 전주 첨벽에 매바용도 아니 디바차사 다로리 사실 세바 디바 섹스리다 간제레 대주지도 추림송비 손에 안에 대주셔도 대한 전주 제제 까마시지 니메하시지 제는 마샤자와 많이 받지 무디제 가신 저유고네 되신 디주 제바이나 아니 디바디게 마 다루고래 해서 메스 세바 디바 섹스야 돼.
The analogy is then applied to purification. So the wind of ethical conduct fans the fires of recitation, burning up bad deeds with flames of great joyous effort. So the winds of ethical conduct. So ethical conduct refers to having reflected on one's conduct, one's behavior, and recognized when it has transgressed the bounds of what is ethical, thereby regret arising. So ethical conduct means one has recognized when one has acted unethically, and therefore regret has been generated. Now with this basis of regret, then one engages in recitation. So recitation without regret, just merely reciting, for example, the mantras, reciting mantras, it's not going to do very much. But when it's fanned by the ethical restraint of regret, then one's recitation will burn up a lot of non-virtue. In particular, then, burning up deeds with flames of great joyous perseverance. When one's ethics and recitation is conjoined with joyous perseverance, then the mind is much more determined, much more focused, much more powerful. Therefore, one will burn up far more non-virtue. So you have not merely recitation, but recitation that arises on the basis of regret and that is fanned by joyous perseverance. The first illustration is very apt to where we live. The second, a little less so, but still the meaning similar. As when the sun's rays strike the snow, it cannot withstand the brilliance and melts.
Tiba de Ghana, Tiba de Pa, Zedures, Dongwana, DP Ganja Sepulchres.
Here, when the verse continues, so when the sun rays of ethical conduct and recitation strike the snows of negative actions, they evaporate. Again, the key point being made is that recitation on its own is insufficient. You need to generate regret. And this comes in the with the understanding of what is ethical and what has transgressed the boundaries of what is ethical. Then, with such regret, one's recitation will purify past misdeeds.
Jesan Dina Shinda, Jugi, and set up Tone Sapi, Dibomu, Deju, and Deju Marme knew the Sewache, said the Chesada, the Nigi, and Jugi Marme Nashin, David Deju Chebaina, Gigala, the Nigi Deju Chedu, and Dibati Patadu.
And there's a third analogy. As when lighting a butter lamp in pitch darkness dispels all the darkness with none remaining, so the darkness of bad deeds accumulated in 1,000 lives is quickly dispelled by the lamp of recitation. And whilst there's no explicit reference here to ethics and joyous perseverance, these would be included. So when one recites, it's on the basis of regret and knowing what is ethical and what is not, and doing so with enthusiasm.
당한제래 한주기 대주의 제위 나사벤테 나사베미 신나 치바나신 안에 대주 제바이나 안에 가서 디바데 다루 그래서 님이 외세기 안에 가서 강슈바나신 안에 나사바이나 대주 제바네 디바다 그래서 얘네 네 로바셔 너무디메바 쇠바나신 세바나신 대주 제네 디바 사기 다그래서 지사데 대주 제리 갑래야 룽아 이수 니제드미 수르야고 송제 대 수르미야고 송외 토네 아니 디슈 제고레서 그래서 수르마고 마선에 디지지지디네 디바사네야지 요마르와데로와데 지위 칸바 디지지 삼로디 샹랴 뉘베 삼바다 제외 삼바다디베네 안디바다 디바 사고로와데 디바다 차야 요마르와 데네 제사 데네자다 디바다데 나라발 차행아 사이세 디니버지디 디바 두라레제 데네 쇠샤베네 데네야 디바사고라 제사디 융아 이수 예제디베 수르미하고 수르미 디토네네 송제 아니 디바셰바 디미누 셈베게 겨바제 데네 수르미송 데네 디바샤에게 돈달아야 데 이게 개발로서 봐 대바이나 아니 데네게 디바다그리 해서 돈나디로
So with the one relates better to the illustration of a bushfire or sunlight melting snow or the butter lamp clearing darkness, the meaning of the three illustrations is the same. That firstly, one has to have a wish to keep one's ethics well. If one doesn't care about ethics, if one doesn't see it as important, one won't regret. So it's unlikely one will engage in any kind of recitation. And even if one did, one would do so without any intensity and without much purification going on at all. One's mind is likely to be distracted. And in fact, one may even have a non-virtuous mind, thinking how wonderful you are and doing all these recitations. But actually, in terms of having an ethical mind of regret and then reciting with joyous perseverance, this would be completely lacking. One merely does a recitation. And therefore, one puts some time and energy into it, but achieves very little. So therefore, the foundation is to be ethical, to recognize when one transgresses the bounds of what is ethical, and then to do something about it. And whilst purifying, to do so with joy, with enthusiasm, recognizing that one, through this process, is transforming one's future trajectory. This should give one joy and enthusiasm.
And in the end, that diva dabegi sama taru majung badu ane dinigi ngadis dini diva shagi ngadi deva chokore so that just chige dene samshashana dene diva tatu mar chesada ya diva daege taksan majung badu sama majung badu chokore den diva jawi ge sama majung badu 마통게 봐도 세대니 제거래서.
So a question people all too often ask, how long do I need to purify what I've done? And here then Lama Tsongkhapa presents a summary of signs that indicate whether one is perhaps experiencing success in one's purification.
안다 되네게 저기 디바다에게 된다는 사지도 제사인데 딱선 가려 연구를 해서는 니lâm 지단 니lâm 예 미딘비 베레 이나다 되네게 나 딱선 따야지 연구를 지난데 가려 연구를 니lâm 되네게 아니 밀lâm 생한 주바스 쉬다 오마서 통화다 주바라서 연구를 했지 베네 칼라 베 주바라서 생한 바도 진짜 주바라서 받아 되네게 유아요 아니 한지 쉬 통화도 엄마 동화라서 받는 통화인 거래서 제가 디니 데네 통화도 디바다비게 따서 채거래서 야지 니마 통화다 남가로 좋아하다 매발와라서 봐 통화요래서 제가다 배 니마야 오샤리야서다 야지야 소소 남가리야 풀어버지 풀어버다 데네 집에 지 매발되어 버려 통화야 되는 연구래서 그래서 디바다비게 따래서 제가 안쪽에 내 디바샤 되네게 디바샤네 데두스는 그나디마 사베사네도 진짜 사비게다 무제 사네도 아니 데네게 다산을 레야 연구를 해서 데네 다산 요바네 디바다베 따래서 그러다 디바다기요 바따래서 어디 근데 저제니 로바네 데네 마에당 미나고 투바다세 미나고의 징제 소식을 투바 연구를 해서 소소 소식을 톱나 토고를 와다 투바다 근데 결론에 개는 통하다. 즉 결론만 나서 봐 개는되게 자와라서 봐다. 얘네 엄마 주위 신다 세대 랑보다 추쇼다 리다 생기에 티당 근데 강상에 대도 잡아 생계 티가라 당도 되는 휴트가라 되어봐다. 강보 약보가 강래야 자되 봐라서 봐다. 근데 내게 랑보치 추들라서 통야라서 봐. 되는 연구를 해서 대전에 답이 따르서 대단한 최년바 최년야라 소바데 남에서는 최년바다 어지 이 되네 용거에서 되네 통화나 다 되네게 디바다베게 따산으로 되네 대 용거를 해서지 어두세 자산 말로하셔도.
So looking at the text, Lama Tsongkhapa writes, you should continue this recitation practice until you see signs that your bad deeds have been purified. In the Dharani of the goddess Chandra, the signs are said to be, and again, just a few changes to the translation, the signs are said to be dreaming of vomiting harmful food, drinking and vomiting things like yogurt or milk, seeing the sun and moon, flying in the sky, seeing a burning fire, subduing a buffalo or black-clothed people, seeing a sangha fully ordained monks and nuns, climbing a tree from which milk emerges, then climbing upon an elephant, a bull, a mountain, a lion throne, or a palace, and hearing the Dharma. So these then are 15 signs mentioned in this text.
All right. Then that Kuzukle Temba said the Yushuana Dare, Sangedan, the Chedela Soba, Casor, Sangela Deba Nine, and Kuzu Jeba so, Jeba was it, Jezada, Tibetabi, Tundala, Sosuke Sangi, Kuzu, Shamba, Sosuke Shamba, and Kuzu Nye, Sosuke Nala Shaba in the Yaji, Ya Shandalia, Combata, Deniki Shandalia, Kuzu, good, in a prayer routine, Tibetabi, Tunda Dushevene, Kuzu Jeba Setide.
Further antidotes suggested, the fourth is to create images of the Buddha, having gained faith in him. So this can either be where one creates images oneself, such as atattas, or maybe sponsors an image to be commissioned, or contributes to an image being commissioned, or maybe purchases a statue. So these are different ways that one can engage in purification, but there we see clearly it's stating this is needing to be done with faith. A mere act of making a purchase is insufficient. This needs to be an antidotal power based in faith, following regret.
And Chebal Temba said it did that Sangedan, the Chedin La Soba, the Chebanabana, the Sangedan, Sangi, Guda, Chedin Laya, and the Chebupua did it, the Chebupua, the Denigi, Chebupua. And the fifth is as making offerings, so relying on making offerings. The fifth is to make various types of offerings to the Buddha and his stupas. And the last illustration of an antidote given is relying on names. The sixth is to listen to and retain the names of the Buddhas and the great Bodhisattvas. And Didani, that is what Garson was in Labdusu, Mosu Junwa, Zamde, Shanya Mangos. She's not this Shevadi, but Labdunalia, and it didn't soon or Dima Son Shubares. She's not delayed seeing Marty Mangutam Manguyores or that. Lama
Tsongkhapa then concludes with quoting his source. These are the practices that are explicitly mentioned in the compendium of trainings, but there are many others. So these should be taken just as an illustration. It's not that it's these practices and these alone that lead to purification. That's not the case at all.
And then the Ungurua, and the Lamla sopa, Solang, Gomba, Gombala sopa, that in the Chazada, Dibata, Tablam Chagurwani.
Because, in fact, any virtuous activity can serve as an antidote if it's done in this context. So one can meditate on bodhicitta, one can generate definite emergence. And when it's done as an antidotal power following regret, then it serves as purification for past misdeeds.
And then never let me do it of said it. Says I let me do it of said it, me give it you, Yanda Tomba, Dini, so you, Queen, Gosumki, Lian Dang, Chigi Jiba, Jebala, Jedu, Jebala, Jedu Juba, Jizu Irang, when Gigi Tamje, Jumbi, Nimini Bolly Sonsosa.
Then the third of the four opponent powers, the power of turning away from further faults, or normally called the power of restraint. The third of the four powers is the power of turning away from faults in the future, which is to completely resist or refrain from committing the 10 non-virtues. Sun Essence Sutra says that this destroys the karma of the 3 doors accumulated through killing and so on. Everything you have done, cause others to do, or rejoice in being done, as well as the afflictive obscurations and obscurations to the Dharma.
디바 싸우기는 지금 매 선배 삼다 디레도 단달로 좀 셈세 디레.
So this is the actual mind of restraint, or very literally is the mind of vows. So it's the mind that binds one to virtue. This particular antidotal power is the mind of restraint, what binds one to virtue.
디네 디네 제베네 디네 소주 권이 고숨기 레다뇨마다 아주 소주변의 레기 가서 고숨기 류가 있음이 디바사야다. 아니 최봉기 디바사야. 아니 랑기 제바다 현재 제도 주바라서 바다 현이 제바라 지수 이랑와 디다 탐제 아니 전바 이미 되는게 마음만 자기는 지금에 선배 섬당에도 안마 디차사 아니 녀마디는 제네 지수 다루고 그래서 전바 이미 비도나라야 송바래 사실 이미 이벌에 송소어서 이래도
So just reading the part about from the sutra again. The sutra says that this destroys the karma of the three doors accumulated through killing and so forth, so the variety of non-virtues that you have done cause others to do or rejoice in being done, as well as afflictive obscurations and obscurations to the Dharma, which means obscurations that have arisen from abandoning the Dharma. So all of this can be purified with sincere turning away from non-virtues, sincere restraint to never again engage in such non-virtuous actions. And again, this follows from having generated regret. Then it can purify significantly.
And dingy top de lang jamdroda and a janshu semdi gesungore, dingy top hesi or jamdroda janshu semdi. Jidadina met me did love dingy top said, top she or what. that's a thing you top said 가르고 딜로메 지상에 시거다 띵이 top said 에 겸로다 안데 장주 쌤들이 송고래시
and
the
power of reliance or the power of support is maybe better is that of refuge and bodhicitta.
당한주 디네 순야 담보 순야 될데 네발라 람미도베 가소레 순지메도다 디네네 뭐여셔야다 디네 네발라미도 돕숭도 띵이 돕 타마도 숭도 다 된다랑한테 디버 샤비게 삼다이도 당한테 두시네 되게 님보 돕시고네 디버 샤야라 가르 삼당월스네 담보 아주 군로로서라다 군로서 띵이 돕 차로 거래 군로서데 네 코리도가 타달래 지금 베닝한 저기 데네 타고도 제가 가질래 아니 대시 담보 순지비 돕지 제자다 디바사 디벨레 용아 냐와 동아 마솔레 끼두고래 스베 동아들라 돈 삼단다 동아 디바사 빼사샤 제자 데네 델레 마탄데 탑민도 세비게 다 데네기 겨버지 계시 데네 겨버지네 데네기 타야게 된다라다 델레 뒤비 니버드 수요데 겹게 거줬으면 요래세 겸로제 데데 띵이 돕지 니벨레 용도 하죠 도신 삼로 당탕에 돈에 삼다네 아주 무소 검제비 갑라 담보 순진비 돕지제 가서 예매를 팀민도스비 노트 삼다 대동알 대삼다 동아에 삼다 다 델레 타고도 선배 삼다데 델레 기비 니버 수요를 되네 겸요 건축숨 요래세 대 띵이 돕지 니버 차고래 띵이 돕 되네 겸요 건축숨 디야다 랑지보 마이베 샘젠 탐제 다 라다 라레베 샘젠 탐제 동아 데니스 사요고 동아뇨 델레 타고도 선배 델레 기 데네게 타야 돼 내지긴 대장에 샘자 탐지도 사유고 뭐 토버지 샘비게 삼다이도 장주 샘게 봐 최고로와 제자도 군원 겸로제 데네 장주 샘게 대자 데네게 제도 띵이도 차오라 다 데네게 삼다네 데네 안에 가서다 다 디인자당에 샘자 탐지 사유고 뭐 토고라 데네 디버드 샤고바 자 디버 마샤나 사유고 바다 탑두고 말 제장에 디버샤기 샘베 삼다제 데네 저기 예목군도 집에 돕어야 차고 데네 디버샤게 된다로 소식이 데네 이게 사베네 사야다 데네 동샤드네 차푸어나 자 대지 다 데네 가르쳐베나 무시디 차고로 디 차선에 데네 담아들라 저기다 네발레 라도베 돕어야 다 마오번에 친지에네 싸우이네 지금에 선배다 디리는 방에 싸우이네 데네 지금에 선배가 삼다이다 가소레 네발레 라도베 돕어야 차고 제가 데네 인자당은 림바 삼다바나 담보 순진비 돕제 가서 냠는 집에 갑라 담보 순진비 돕 데네 님목군도 집에 가소레 땡기 돕어야 돼. 되네 님부군도 주비 돕. 되네 담아들라 안에 냐발라 돕어야 돼. 두신의 삼다이래도 하나.
As our time is for this week is nearing an end, I'll just briefly summarize these four opponent powers, because they're presented here in a specific order. One in practice can engage in them in any sequence one chooses. The sequence is not set, but most probably one will start with regret, as the first opponent power, because here one is engaging in a process of purification. So one needs to identify what it is that one wants to purify. So one recalls non-virtue that one has done, perhaps today, perhaps recently, or something that one has done regularly, or if it's not even something one is recalling, but no, in all likelihood I will have done. One recalls non-virtues and then reflects on the karmic results that will follow from these. The cause is accumulated, the result will follow, unless I do something about it, unless I purify sufficiently. So here one generates, first recalls past non-virtue, and then generates regret, thinking about the negative consequences for it. Those negative consequences, you look at it through the lens of suffering for myself in lives to come, or the suffering I caused to others as well. So in this way, one generates sincere regret, this genuine thought of, I wish I had not done that. Then one can move into the second opponent power, which may well be that of support, or as it's translated here as the power of reliance. Support in that one's very support in one's purification practice is that of refuge and bodhicitta. These are the minds that support one in this practice. So the mind of refuge, here one turns one's mind to refuge in the three jewels, recognizing that the Buddha and the Sangha jewel, these are our example and our companions, and I commit to acting in accordance with their example by cultivating the Dharma jewel within and acting in accordance with the Dharma jewel. So one goes for heartfelt refuge, committing to act in accordance with the three jewels. And doing so, not just for one's own spiritual development, but for the sake of all suffering mother sentient beings. So here one starts to generate bodhicitta, recognizing that in order to benefit beings, I have to purify my mind. I need to remove my mind, taints from my mind stream, so that I can be of more benefit to others. So here the support of refuge and bodhicitta supports one in the purification practice. Then one can move into that of the antidote, the third, recognizing now I'm going to engage in the cultivation of an antidote so that I can remove these obstacles from my continuum and ensure thereby, through the strengthening habituation to virtue, I do not engage in similar behavior again. So I'm now going to purify. And then one can engage in any antidotal power, maybe a particular object of meditation, or maybe making offerings, or maybe doing Vajrasattva recitation, whatever one chooses. And then finally, the power of restraint, or the promise, where one makes the commitment, not only do I wish I'd never done that, I will never do it again. I may have an inclination to do these kinds of harmful things, but I will not follow through on it. I will refrain from such non-virtue again. And one makes this commitment, this promise. So in this way, one can engage in the meditation on the four opponent powers.
Dene chene na ju ke kewas divasai ga tandala ne kewa trup ne kewa trup ne jele ya that chinje ne ti dene ki diva zao gi chi me a sampe ge semle ya zao gi chi me sa damcha khelin che de samdai dirwa dene sa jele ya su su ge kewa sa sha ba de kewa di semja tamji de no wa ja ba ne da chen ju ro ngo ju sum cha sa cha wa de cha go ro.
This is important, and I really encourage people to engage in this purification practice. And again, the sequence is flexible, it's up to you, but one generally will start with regret. And regret is indispensable for the purification process to happen. One needs to generally regret what one has done, not see it as acceptable, not to justify it. So this is important. Then one will often turn to the support for one's practice, refuge and bodhicitta, thereafter into whichever antidotal power one feels inclined to. And then finally, the actual mind of ethical conduct, or mind of ethical restraint, which is the restraint from non-virtue, the restraint from doing this again.
Dene janju semge ne dene sosu ke kaduni chechebana kadun garjibe doyande chebene di kadun di nyembu kundu chebe do chagora kadunje dene kadunje sayenda da chinjenenge dene diba zawagine chegime sambige da domsembege dene ene gewati ngoa kyapdene de chebene da sosu ke kadunje bene chezada kunlu nyembu denege sunjinbe samlata denege ene kunlu kyamdo da chenju sem chik namis and the chigor wadanje denishe dene kadune dibasha dondale to chigyo sembe kaduniche undiche dene and chinjen zawgin chigime sembeda kadun sale samjeda da mohban zawgin chigime sembe domsneke dene dejine gewati hawo ajashana dene namjino toge that nimbo topshukone nine soso kadun gar shebena gar sagene dichende nimbo topshukone diba shabade nimde le chae leurwa.
If your daily commitments have become a bit of a recitation and not too much more, then I encourage you to transform the way you do your daily commitments in the following way. First, sit down, generate regret for past non-virtues, so call something to mind and generate genuine regret for it in the way advised. Then go for refuge and generate bodhicitta, taking a few moments to do so. And then, as your antidotal power, engage in the recitation of your commitments. And finally, after you've recited your commitments, then make the ethical mind of restraint, making the determination, I will not engage in such non-virtue again, and then finally dedicate. So the way I've just described the purification practice only takes a little longer than what you already do in terms of your commitments. But what you are adding is regret at the start, and then spending a bit of time on refuge and bodhicitta, which is essential. The purification will be your recitation, but now it is supported by refuge and bodhicitta. And then at the end, you conclude with the mind of restraint, which is the mind of ethics. So this too is intentionally cultivated. And finally, your dedication. So in this way, you can combine purification practice with your already existing daily commitments. It's not a large additional amount, just a few additional minutes. And in this way, that time you spend doing your daily commitments will be far more productive.
미가 제발했더니 동화 연구하래 아니 대디 디기 겨주 발했더니 연구를 세배 되네게다 지가 삼다 하고야 돼 대기치 뭐지 대야 좀 지야 다도 고숨기 야 가르쳐베네 디발 먹고 봐게 되나다는 도시에 계치 모르세 대야 도시에 직제 안대야 지电线 저와 중화래电의 주바마도 그런 경우에는 주바 가야요 말해서 베게 삼다야다 니네게 삼다지 니네게 삼다네 되네 다리디 예마 디바 사샤바다 디게 다딩아 저기 레균의 소유도 디바다다 쟁보로와 지다다 예마 사샤바다 까블레 디바 쟁바이나야 즉 디바 샤르다 숄리야 디바 사바용도 다디수바 님보도 쉬고네 디시슈바나 루션 삼다 제베나 당한 저기다 디나이 송바나신 다바레 지지고로와 지사도 나님보 디니시고레 소야 나신 당한 디니시야디 게치모 안 차살이야 안 디니시고고로와다
to summarize what we've looked at this weekend in our presentation on cause and effect, is that happiness comes from virtue and suffering comes from non-virtue. This simple statement that no one will disagree with, this we need to recognize to the extent that we are drawn to virtue and we are repulsed by non-virtue. The very thought of following the afflictions leads to an arisal of aversion. This is the mind of ethics, restraining us, protecting us from non-virtue. This is the extent to which we need to reflect on this topic. Also, we looked at the need and the great benefit in recognizing that because causes lead to effects, or effects follow from causes, they are dependent arisings. And as they are dependent arisings, they are empty of inherent existence. And I spoke about that at some length. And then lastly, that despite our best efforts to refrain from non-virtue, non-virtue is still accumulated from time to time. Moreover, we have a large store of non-virtue on our continuum. Therefore, purification is essential for all of us. I engage in it and I encourage you to engage in heartfelt purification on a daily basis in the way that's been described. So this then, in brief, is what we've looked at this weekend. Okay, then thank you. Thank you all very much.